stage is yours. Please welcome Michele Bustamante.
Hi. How is everybody tonight? You have beer, I've noticed. I have an opener and I have no beer. You have one for me? Is that Christian? Oh wait, there's probably 10 or 15 Christians in here. What am I saying? So I'm happy to be here. This is my first time at BASTA, so this seems like a pretty good conference. I'm Michele Leroux Bustamante, as he said, and whatever else he said, I hope it was good. I'm going to talk to you about something that is very near and dear to me, and hopefully with a spin on it that works also in Europe, because I know that things are a little bit different here than they are in the States sometimes, or a lot of the time. But I have a lot of background working with, the cloud. I have a lot of background working with customers, big and small. And I've really been involved with a lot of bootstrapping processes with startup. And I've learned a lot about how that can work for other business too. So I'm hoping I can share that with you and make it fun. So I'm a little busy sometimes. Short background, I would just say I've been an architect with iDesign, and probably most people know me as that for the last 12 years. And we do high-end architecture consulting, so I focused myself on WCF, cloud identity, some training as well. And I'm also a consulting architect for Quest Software because they acquired a company I was a partner in and a product that I had helped to build. So I do that in my spare time. And of more recent, I've been involved in a new startup that's kind of following a few attempts. And I want to share a little bit about that process with you, but mostly with the focus on the process, not so much on my product, if that makes sense. So that's called Snapboard, and you'll hear more about that later. This is my slide that tells you where to find me. So now you know where to find me. Let's move on. So before we talk about the subject at hand, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on some other things besides what I just listed on that slide. Because even though most of my life has been consulting, I actually have a pretty deep history of working with small, medium startups. Most of them had already been started before I got there in the 90s. Like in 1992, I drove from Toronto, where I'm from, and moved to California for my first real job. I was like 9, and I drove really young. So anyway, that was funnier in my head. I started at this company that was involved in imaging software. Oh my goodness, you're really bringing me a beer. Wow, this is going to get really fun, isn't it? It would be rude if I didn't have some, right? Will you let me know if I have foam on my mouth? Okay. So when I went to this first company, and every company I've been at, I've learned something really valuable, I think, about business. And I might not have realized some of that until I got much more mature. We don't say older. And the first company I worked at, what I learned is that, a small business that's paying attention to where is their market can pivot many times and finally succeed. This company started out with an imaging product, just like Photoshop. I think even easier, because I could use that one. And then it went to move on and use the same technology around that alpha channel layering and all that good stuff into a morphing product that allowed us to make videos and merge things and morph and introduce really interesting animations. Went nowhere, right? It was fun to build, though. And that then turned into a landscape wizard product, still focusing on imaging, still focusing on graphics, trying to use that same technology, but adding some, OpenGL in the early days and doing, 3D rendering in front of a house so you could build a landscape. So this architect came to us and said, let's build a product. We'll knock it out of the market. Never went anywhere. But we tried. And then finally, it landed on something that worked, and that was called Crimes. And the purpose was to build composites of criminals after an interview with a witness. And it actually took off. Not like wildfire. It took time. But luckily, they had the money and the ability to sort of carry that through. And today, they're still around. So that's kind of interesting, right? Solid technology, didn't quite find the right customer, finally figured out how to apply the technology and make it. And now they do all kinds of interesting identity stuff for government and so on because they found their niche, they found their customer, and they continue to evolve. So that's good. The next company I would talk about is one where maybe didn't go so well. Document management, workflow, is very popular still today in the BPM space. IBM is one of the main players there, really. And we had a product called, well, doesn't matter what it was called anymore, but it was called Motiva. And we were based on FileNet Panagon, if you've ever heard of FileNet. IBM acquired them probably about 10 years ago, I think. But the problem is the value add that was being offered, people didn't need it that much. So there's a real big flaw in that business, and that is we didn't really find a customer that really needed what we were producing. But we had a lot of money and funding, so it was worth building anyway. So it was like, let's build the product. It's really cool. People will need it, I'm pretty sure. And it kind of didn't work out. Also, it was very PSO intensive. Professional services required to install. Uh-oh. You can do that when you're IBM, because you can afford to. You can't do that when you're a startup running out of money, right? So you don't have the bandwidth. The next one I would talk about is one kind of interesting, was started on a $500 credit card. Not by me, I wish, because it IPO'd at 30 million. But the guy that started that, I mean, he and his wife, literally, $500 credit card, piece of code that worked. And you know what? It was like the product that you probably know the best is WebTrends. Everybody's heard of WebTrends. Well, it was the same as that, essentially, but it was called Hitbox. And now that company, Website Story, was acquired eventually by Omniture, so it's still around. But that guy IPO'd, and he used to come into our offices and say, I want all of you to get rich. Let's innovate. He'd let us all innovate and try new ideas and stuff. We did a lot of social stuff in the early internet days. He'd say, I want all of you guys to be rich, because if you're rich, I'm really freaking rich. And he didn't say freaking, but that was very, very good for him. And it was an interesting story of just try something out, very little product, didn't do much, made tons. Really cool. When I left there, I went to probably the more interesting of my experiences pre-consulting, and that was my cloud era pre-cloud. Because I went to a company that did certificates of insurance online. And certificates of insurance sound really boring. And they are. But it was super cool what we did, because really, we didn't have the cloud, right? And people were nervous about hosting still. They were called application service providers back then, right? And we had to convince people to trust us with their data. And it wasn't mission critical data for the customer, but the thing we were doing was mission critical for them. We needed their data to issue these certificates, which sometimes happened in 100,000 in a batch. They had these peak loads, you know, quarterly. And it was really hard for businesses to take care of that without a tool. So we thought, we'll do it online. At any rate, what was interesting to me is we're now in an era that's completely different. Back then, we had to acquire big iron. I mean, Solaris boxes. We spent probably $750,000 all in on software, licensing, vendor support, and actual iron and co-location. That's a lot of money. Can you imagine a startup trying to do that? Can you imagine any new business trying to put something in the cloud today and have that capital investment up front? It's insanity. Plus, never mind that, we had to know how to do it. Do you think everybody that worked in the company already had the expertise to run a 24/7 operation? That was like the beginning of what you might even consider an era of 24/7 operations. So it was all learn as you go. And the way that I made sure everything was going to run smoothly, since it was going to be my butt if everything went wrong, is I built an SLA. I wrote a 60-page document that literally collected from every participant across the IT team, how are we backing up, how are we recovering, how is it secure, what does the topology look like, blah, blah, blah. I'm not an IT person, But now I know enough to be dangerous, right? Because I had to go through that process and really try to understand it from really a developer/executive's perspective, right? So that was expensive. It was time-consuming. It required trying to prove to customers you can trust us. They would say, we're going to send you 100,000 requests for certificates in a given week, and it needs to be sent in a day. That was just bullying, because they could. Do you want to know how many customers actually sent us that many requests in a day? 0. Because they always think they're going to do that. And they're always nervous you're going to shut down or some other customer's going to shut you down. But they're never really going to do that. And if they do, I suppose it's a good problem to have, because then there's money to be made. Today, we would do that so much differently, though, right? So those were good learnings, and they apply to the stuff I'm going to talk about, which is why I brought those up. You know, then I followed a whole long stretch of consulting, visiting with anything from startups to, you know, Fortune 100 companies, doing lots of interesting different things. But about 3 years ago, got involved in a startup called Bitku, which was a security product, and they invited me to be a partner in the business to help branch out some of the existing product, and I learned a couple of really good things there. One, the CEO was really brilliant. He took a product he built at Disney, and he turned it into a company. He said, Disney, you don't want to keep maintaining this security thing we created. Let me make a business out of it, and then you have a partnership in the business, and you know, now you've got developers actually building this product out and giving you the features, and we'll just go ahead and sell it to other people too and make a profit. Good idea, right? A lot of people could do that, actually, if you really thought about it, with things you build, branch it out, let it be maintained by somebody else. So that worked out really well. The second thing that I learned really well, which is something that's an important message today, is build the product for actual customers that want it. And you will actually build the best product you could imagine. So there's nothing like having a customer already needing it before it's done. And we had a lot of that go on with the products that I was, you know, spearheading. And wow, was that awesome, because those products have some seriously awesome features as a result. I mean, that's probably a big reason why Quest Software acquired the company, which is what happened. And now Dell acquired Quest, so whatever. So, but it's just an interesting process, seeing all these different things that businesses go through to become successful. And it's all about customers at the end of the day. And then from the cloud perspective, it's about that reliability and safety and security. Now, I sort of got the entrepreneurial bug late in life. I'm 29. And that sort of led to me trying another startup, which didn't go. And it didn't go for a couple reasons. And these are important lessons, too. I partnered with somebody who had a really big idea, brilliant, but the problem is we needed money to get it off the ground. Today, you don't get the money before you prove traction. It's not the 90s anymore. So if you don't have a large company with funding behind it, you can't just do that. You have to show people want it. But with an idea a certain size, you have to do all of it to gain the momentum when you're pulling a lot of pieces together. Or do you? Maybe the lesson learned was we didn't really build a minimum viable product. So we held out for more, built all kinds of things, but really just could never get it to be believed by anybody. Here's some money. Go do it. So we learn. And therefore, since then, I started another startup in my spare time. But we have a team, and we're trying to use all those lessons learned. So let's get going on, you know, sort of the things that I just talked about, but apply it to the cloud and how the cloud can help us and what the process is and so forth, okay? So we're going to talk about the lean startup philosophy, but not in the context of startup, in the context of really anything you're building, any new business, any new product idea. Enterprise can do this too. We're going to talk about how to bootstrap those ideas, how to get it off the ground, at least some ideas on how to get it there, and in some cases how the cloud can help you to do that effectively. And then, of course, because we care about money, we need to talk about how we predict this, heavily transactional cloud prospect and apply that to revenue, apply that to what do we charge people, et cetera. There's no one answer for these things, right? But it's a perspective. And the other thing I have to assume is that the people that are here are interested in things that we might put in the cloud. That doesn't have to be a UI-based system. It could be back-end services that are, behind a mobile device of some sort, and then that's really the application or the face of it. But the point is that something's going in the cloud, and there needs to be a way to get that off the ground, get it live, find out early if we're going to succeed or fail, right? So that's the point. So the philosophy of Lean Startup, just very quickly, is you test your idea extremely early, before code, no code, screenshots, mocks, even just talking to customers about their problems. What are they trying to solve? If you know that, you can probably start thinking of ideas on how to fix it. So we'll go through that. Learn whether the customer segments. You might be surprised that there's a segment you didn't think of that could use a piece of your idea in a different way, and then you pivot. You end up not building what you thought you were going to build because you discovered, oh, wait a minute, there's a good use for that. Let's do that. Let's focus on that. That's a good segment. They'll actually pay. Let's not even do that stuff we were thinking we were going to do. So you're targeting, which implies you have to talk to people and figure out who wants any piece of this idea and why. What problems are we solving? You want to write as little code as possible. This is the hard part. And it's hard for me too. Developers hate to put something live in front of someone. It's like letting someone look at your code. Nobody wants anyone looking at your code, because nobody likes anybody else's code, even if it's awesome. It's just true. Same thing goes for a product, right? You don't want to put it live. You don't want anyone to see it until you've got the design in front and all the nice icons and all the graphics and so on. It's natural, but you have to get over that, because there's no way to find out early before you waste your time unless you do that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And in this process, you have to gather feedback, you have to listen, and you have to monitor how people use what you let them play with. That's important too. So pivot as needed. If the feedback says this isn't going to work, shift. Find out what will work. Try something different. Try a different segment. Ask people questions. And repeat. It seems like it might take a long time, but actually it doesn't. I mean, as long as you meet the right people, I suppose. Pull them into the Q&A process. You want to fail faster. If the customer isn't going to like what you're doing, you might as well find out now, right? It's like wondering, if your boyfriend's going to break up with you or your girlfriend. You might as well find out now, right? Because then you can move on. Find out if the customers like what you're delivering. Find out if they're really wanting something similar but different. Find out now. But certainly don't waste your time building the whole thing, even a piece of the thing, and making it to perfection and putting it live. That's way too much time. Don't even create a login for that thing. It's a waste of time. Go to your customers, pick some people that you can sit together and go through what your plan is. They have to be willing to do that with you, or they don't want the product. And if they don't want the product, fail faster. Find out now. Because if they're not going to invest in that far, then they must not need it. You have to be prepared for that possibility. And that's the hardest thing. Oh, you're just not my customer base. I'll find another one, Something that is a common equation is we've got customers and problems, and what do we want to put after that? There's a solution. But the reason people get so stuck on what they think they want to build is because they start there. Here's a solution. I think I know your problem. What do you think? Totally the wrong end. You got to start from the other end. And you know, I'm not certainly an expert at all things psychology in startup land or in new business land. And, you know, we all learn as we go. But I've talked to a lot of people, and one person I would just say there's a really good website. It's a simple website, but it has a lot of really good information about this process. Finding out who your customer segment is, finding out, you know, how to do a user-driven process to discover the correct segments and find the people that will pay. Because you want the paying customers first, if possible. So don't start with the solution. You can think you have a solution, but I wouldn't even show that to people until you've asked them some questions. And that's really hard to do, because you want to show people stuff and ask them, what do you think? Click here, 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 here. Do you like it? But you've already led the witness. So now you're never going to hear what's the problem they really have that they'd like somebody to solve, because you've already put in front of them a little piece of maybe that problem, so you're not going to hear the other things. And if you just put up in front of people some sort of simple web page to collect information, and I've been through this process, that's why I'm talking about it, literally asking somebody, when you're doing technical research, just an example, what are the challenges? Don't lead them into what the product is you want to build. Just what are the challenges? Tell me what it is, right? With our Snapboard product, I asked everybody from my neighbor, who is a good friend, to who's not technical, and her answer was, I want Hannah's world. I want to play. Folders are confusing. I don't like computers. Totally different person than people in this room, right? But then you talk to people at the other end who are saying, you know, they have a different problem, and yet maybe there's a way the product could solve both of those people's problems. But until you ask those questions, you don't really know. What do they want? Okay. So when you ask people questions, guess what else you have to do? You have to listen after. People don't do that very well. You're not my customer base. You don't get it. No, when we put the UI together a little bit better, then they'll like it. It's got to be a wicked UI. Ooh, wow. As soon as you're depending on the UI to sell it, people don't need it bad enough, right? That's a bad harbinger. So you get the idea. We have to listen. We have to be prepared. Somebody doesn't like what we're offering. I asked some questions before I came here. I said I was doing my first keynote at BASTA, and I got a whole bunch of feedback. I actually didn't really expect any feedback, but I was saying, oh, what should I wear? Just for fun. I mean, really, literally, I put it up there for fun. It's Facebook, right? And I'm glad my Canadian girlfriends didn't respond there, because it wouldn't have been showable here. But the point is, I got a lot of really interesting responses. You know, Raspberry Beret, really? Lars is a bad boy. You know who you are. He's not here, though. Red boots, because of Red Dog, you know, Azure. I didn't listen to any of them. What do they know? But the problem is, that's exactly what people do with products. I don't really have to listen to these people. It's just, what am I going to wear? Who cares? But when you're building product and you ask questions, you can't say that. You can't say, what do they know? Or, that's silly. Nothing's silly. It's real to them. Unless they start talking about Raspberry Berets and things, in which case maybe it is silly. So we have to move on from, okay, we've collected information, we've listened, we hope. Now we're ready to build a minimum viable product. What is that? All kinds of products have, you know, a set of viable features, things we know we think we want to do. Maybe a long list that leads to a longer roadmap. And then there's a bunch of, you know, minimum features that products that only do the minimum probably are a bunch of crap nobody wants to use. And there's somewhere in the middle there that's the sweet spot. That's your minimum viable product. The bare minimum features with a little bit of the viability overlapping, right? It's got to at least solve a problem. It's got to at least be useful for one scenario, one action, before you can have people use it. And having people use it doesn't necessarily even mean they're paying yet. There is this whole popular thing about freemium, premium, and free professional and whatnot, depending on the type of product that you're building. So that's maybe an option. The point is, minimum viable means really literally bare minimum. At that point, yes, you need to have a login, but maybe you don't need a rich user management feature where you can give delegated control and all that kind of stuff. Yes, you can create an account in my system, but maybe we're not going to let you manage multiple accounts right away because that's just not really urgent. Let's test this out. And then there's a whole bunch of products that just go to waste because they don't even touch either of those, right? They're just junk. So the point is to figure out what is your minimum viable product and get it out there as soon as possible. But how do we do that? We do that by repeating the process I already told you. It's progressive. You start with wireframes. You let people look at it, maybe even touch it. If you have a fast designer, maybe you get some mock-ups done. If you have a fast designer and programmer on the UX, literally let them hack. I know I said it. It's really hard for me to do that too. I actually can't be the developer in that phase. It's impossible because I will refactor as I go because I can't stop myself. But you need somebody who won't do that because they got to be fast. Just get something done, get it working, and show it. And if it's not ugly, if you're not embarrassed, you waited too long. Truly. Because you know what? You're not putting it out to the public. You're talking to people at a handshake distance. You're pulling in customers that could be interested in the product, and you're literally sitting there with them, either in a webcast or together in a room, even better, and you're saying, okay, let's go through these questions. Let's go through what I've got here. And when they say, I did this actually. I did this the other day with a potential customer of what we're doing. And it was really interesting because he's a friend of one of my partners, so it was kind of a comfortable, but he's also got a real problem he wants to solve, and it's a rather large company. And I had a hard time showing what we had because it wasn't merged with the latest designs or anything. And he even commented on that, and yet as we continued talking, then it became more focused on the problem he wants to solve. And he got past the initial, oh. Because you know what? It's going to happen. Oh, you're wearing that outfit? Doesn't work so well. But you have to be not afraid to do that because you will get past that, oh, to tell them at this distance, we're just going to talk about what are you trying to do and how would you use this and what comes to mind that you might need further. Make sense? So you do that, and then at the end of that conversation, I showed him the mock of the new design, and he went, oh. But I didn't show him that first. I stuck to it, see the stuff I was afraid to show. Because it literally, you can't delete anything, you can't edit anything, there's no login. It's bare bones, one function being served. It's hard, but it works. And then you iterate on that, and you add a little more features, and you listen. And eventually you get to a point where you've done that with enough people, you know your customer segment, you understand what you need to do, and you're ready to go for the minimum viable product and put it out there. So we're going to shift gears and talk about the cloud and how that can help us achieve some of that goal. Because this whole iterative process, assuming it is a potentially public-facing thing, either on the service side or in the UI side, we have to have a way to do this fast and iterate and so on. And you remember I talked a little bit about the cloud then, which is my experiences, at ConfirmNet before we had cloud, really having to sell everything, really having to take care of all these things on the list here, right? You have full ownership of where things are hosted. You have to deal with all the network and connectivity and redundancy and failover and testing every single node fails over and testing backup and recovery, which I always have fun saying that, when we tried our backup and recovery of the database, and we almost hadn't tried that before we went live. And I said, oh, that I'm doing this service level document. We really have to try that and kind of go through the process, because we're saying as a commitment we're doing this quarterly or monthly or whatever it was. And sure enough, we discovered that it didn't replay the logs correctly, so it was a good thing we tested that. So all those things, you're responsible for every piece of it, right? Capital investment being probably the worst part of it. When we go to infrastructure as a service, like how Amazon and now Azure has, you get a little bit better. The multi-tenancy is still there, but you still get a lot of the features, except for the virtual machine operating system. You have to manage those deployments and patches and all of those things. And you still kind of need a little bit more of an IT focus. Somebody managing that process as an IT ops person. When we go to PaaS, it lightens the load on the IT side, which is exactly what you want when you're iterating and it's not even a live product. And by the way, I know that not everybody here maybe ever put a product in the cloud, right? Because there's so many data restrictions and so forth. Maybe only pieces could go to the cloud. Maybe none can, depending on what your business is. However, when you're doing an iterative approach and trying to prove, does this work? Do you like what I'm doing? And so on. Maybe because you're not putting real data out there and you're not making it available to customers and there's no Google Analytics going live with this product kind of thing, you can use the cloud to get it out there fast and not have the IT overhead. Because that's what you want, fast iterations. Test it, test it, test it. Do you like what I'm doing, yes or no? So that's what I think PaaS helps with in the pre-minimum viable product stage, which is a very critical time for building new business and new ideas. So it's easier to go lean in the cloud today, for sure, than it was back in the day. And with PaaS, I can be in Visual Studio and bam, it's out there ready to go. That's dangerous when you're going to production, so we don't give them the key there, right? That's got to be managed by IT. But MVP, we should be able. And I say MVP, remember, it's minimum viable product, not most valuable professional. So you get these free hosted websites, so it doesn't have to cost you anything. You don't need, oh wait, who are the IT people in the room? Anybody? No? It's all devs? Wow. Okay. Don't tell them. There's no IT required. It's headless. And I'm going to argue, if you're a startup and you're agile, you still don't need IT on any scale when you go live. Now, eventually you do. You start getting busy, you start having multiple machines, you start having to scale out, you start having to really manage that thing. We still care about all those service level concepts, security, failover, how do we scale, how do we get alerts when something goes wrong. We still care about all that. But the bare minimum stuff that you need to know as a startup or as a small business, you could actually do with the support of PaaS and a good developer, just to get started. And then there's going to be a threshold whereby you pass that. And you need somebody that at least is focused on it. Maybe it doesn't even have to be an IT person per se, but somebody focused on management and operations and measuring and metrics and diagnostics. It's fast, it's efficient, it's low risk because there's no cost. Put it out there. Put side-by-side comparisons. Create 10 websites. Maybe they do different things. Send them to different customers. Measure how they use it. It's free. It's just easy to get it out there. And then you can even test then with multiple different customer segments in a different way. Learn, listen, iterate. So you may or may not have seen some of the stuff that we can do. I just thought very quickly I would show you perspective. Because if you haven't seen this, this will maybe be useful. So just a second. So if we go to the Azure websites here, I have two. This one I deployed before. And it's just a simple MVC that I downloaded a publisher policy for, or a policy file, and I attached that when I said I wanted to deploy, and bam, it was in the cloud. I didn't have to provision IIS, I didn't have to provision machines, I didn't have to do anything. It just built it for me. So it put this site out there. Now, if I go back again and we take a look at Snapboard Test 2, This guy, I just downloaded the published profile. And once I save that, which, by the way, I already have actually over here. So if I go to my C drive, and down here, you can see I've got 2 of these publisher files. So literally, you go to Visual Studio, and I'm going to just make sure I'm in the right one here. Yep. And you go to your web, which is just an MVC project, publish, and at that point, you pick your profile. So I can import that profile somewhere here, and it'll load up all the details for the profile for how to get that pushed to the cloud. I don't really have to touch that. It's going to ask me if I want a database to deploy, but in this case, I just kept it simple. There was no database yet, which is another thing to talk about. Our early iterations had no database behind it because we were just trying to prove the concept. We initialized a bunch of data in memory, let it run for the session. People could play. They'd lose it at the end of the session. Who cares? As little time and code as possible to get answers. Do you like this or not? You know? So this will go ahead and publish. I won't waste the time looking at it, but literally that was the only thing we had to do. So it doesn't get much easier than that. It doesn't get more agile than that, and that's going to help you with your iterations quickly, easily, effectively, no IT involved. No IT involved actually has another side benefit for you, not for them. If they don't like when you can do stuff without them, that doesn't make them happy. But the truth is, you're doing this to achieve a goal pre-go live, so it shouldn't really bother anybody because it's not a real product yet. And then you're not burdening them with, oh, can you provision a machine, and we got to take that out to the internet, and I need another machine, and can you make an IIS directory and this and that and the other thing, or get me access? Too much time. I already did this in 1 minute. Done, right? It's almost as easy to do the same with your regular Azure deployments, and you may or may not have obviously gone through those before. I'm not really going into code here because it's really a waste of time, given we have lots of other stuff to talk about. But when you publish, obviously you're picking where you want to deploy it, and it's going to deploy a web role instead. Instead of 15 minutes, it takes 7 now. That's good. But I think that the one thing that we have to do, which is not the same as the website deployment, is we have to deal with configuration. We have to deal with the idea, actually, let me go to a different site, that there are things I might want to change at runtime, and I don't want to wait 7 minutes to deploy it again, right? That would be silly. So I have to rig my system early on with, a bunch of config settings that are not in my web config, but instead are in my actual role config, and that probably makes sense to you. And some of these stakes, if you saw that, some of these I've marked with REC, which means recycle. So actually you can put code in your app so that it will only recycle for those, and the rest is just the code runs and it always reads from config, stateless. So these are important little tips. And if I go over to, not there, but let's say, these are my cloud services for that actual deployed app right now. And if I take a look at configure, all of those configuration settings are surfaced here now, which is because the new portal is much, much better, right? So I could come in here and I could say, oh, I want to, turn on Windows logs. So I want to be able to turn on and off Windows logs, right? So if I want to enable those, then this is going to end up recycling my app. So if I don't have 2 instances, and it can't swap between them, so I might have some downtime as it recycles. Not for long, but still, some downtime. So by saving that, I'm causing a recycle. Okay. So the point is, it's super easy to deploy, super easy to iterate, and that's that. So we've got some information now. We've got something out there that we can give to our customers. We're going to find out if they like what we've done so far. We're going to iterate. We're going to show them stuff we're not proud of, and we're going to deal with that. But we also need to collect their feedback. So there's two types of feedback tools that are really important. One is early iteration, and forevermore, really. You want to collect information about how they use it, maybe get some votes on new things you're introducing, maybe do some A/B testing. And then, of course, in terms of other ways we can integrate with SaaS providers, there are features we might want to deploy, but we don't want to build them. So I'll talk about that, too. Feedback is, I need metrics. And I don't mean diagnostics. We're not even live yet. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, how do you use my thing I just built and put live? So there's things like polling, there's things like heat maps and click maps, conversion rates, and A/B testing that are all really useful. A poll, what color do you like? I'm doing new logos. And people vote, and you find out. You can make it as wide a poll as you want and tweet it, or you can make it just first a couple of people, see how that goes. Maybe we'll change the logo again. I don't know. The votes come back. You start seeing what people like. You may not even choose what looks most popular for other reasons, but at least you're seeing if there's any visceral reactions to some of the colors. You can look at demographics. This is a US map. Obviously, you can do the world, right, and look at where the demographics might be different. It looks like teal is very popular across most of the states. Don't know if that means anything, but for other surveys, it might be useful. Heat maps are useful because it says where people are clicking. Well, of course, they click the text box and the button, but what's that? I asked you to enter something and click a button, and some moron just clicked all over the text and stuff. I'm just kidding when I said moron. What I meant is, that's what you're not supposed to say. You're learning. I'm learning that people don't know what to do there, maybe. And then, of course, we can come in and look at how many clicks. I took this, obviously, very early on. There's only one click, but it shows you the areas that were touched. How many times, on average, did people do that? Maybe only one person clicked the text, so you can get some counts. It's very useful information. Imagine you change the layout of your UI, and people keep clicking this area that's not even an active area. It tells you something. A/B testing, in our case, we wanted to check if people liked seeing a list of links or not, if they want to drill down to see. It's just an example. This is the kind of thing that you do. You take a piece of your UI and say, you know, I'm not really sure if this is too complicated and that's simpler. Let's try it out. And you can get some metrics on that, very useful metrics. And there's a lot of free tools out there and free trials out there for collecting these types of metrics. So just as a brief perspective, let's go here. This, again, you know, this is not go live. I realize, for example, tools like Google Analytics are not even allowed to be used, right, on a live product here. But this isn't a live tool or a live product. This is you trying to learn about users in a very tight setting, right? So this doesn't have to be in a live thing. It could be closed, behind the enterprise, whatnot. The point is, you know, you're going to see conversion rates, right? How many people came and clicked and signed up? You're going to see, here's an example of a heat test on a different board that shows me, oh, people are clicking the snaps, you know, or somebody is clicking the title, or people seem to get that they're supposed to click here to add. That's good, right? It's good feedback. Here's an example. You know, with the conversions, you're just looking at how did people, you know, what percentage of people converted. And since I don't have two A/B tests here, this is just one page, and it's telling me what was the percentage, right? And if I want to look at heat maps, then I can get a sense of where are people clicking, which is starting to look all over, right? It's changing as more people come in. Interesting feedback, though, interesting information. when we talk about A/B tests, setting those up are also pretty easy, right? So you can come in here, and you pick 2 sites. Let me show you, actually. I can go to My Azure, and if I come over here to Snapboard Test 3, or not, let's go here. Yeah. So I'm going to here, Snapboard Test 3. And there it is, just to get the correct link. So Test 3 and 3B are basically 2 different versions. One has the links and one doesn't. Just an example, you pick stuff in your UI you want to compare and contrast. And it'll automatically figure out that I always go to that test, and it'll make me sticky to the one test, or you can make it so that it round robins me between them, and it'll end up showing, oh, when people went to the one with the links, they clicked more things. And when they went with the one that they had to drill down, they didn't seem to like that as much. They stopped clicking through. There was less conversion. Does that make sense? Really valuable pieces of information, super easy. Do you know how we added that? One line of, like just a bit of JavaScript that they give you to put in. Super, super easy. So moving on, we've got feedback now. We're collecting information. We're listening. We're iterating. But there's another thing we have to think about. Features. Our MVP is approaching. I want to go live with something, and I want to focus on my core business. I don't want to focus on things that will be a distraction. So supporting features that you could get from a third party can be very useful. Examples. I want to send emails. Do I really want to manage my own SMTP server and all of those things? No. There's tons of tools out there. Actually, for 25,000 emails a month, as long as you're using Azure, SendGrid gives you 25,000 free a month. It's awesome. If I have more than 25,000 a month, I guess I'm in business, I hope, if I'm charging enough. So e-commerce is another good example. Some of us can't even host the things we'd like to in e-commerce. There's a whole lot of litigation potentially around that. There's a whole lot of compliance and things that people who do e-commerce specialize in. Let them do their job. They do it well. Security, web SSO, directories. Do I want to write all that from scratch? I shouldn't have to anymore, right? We have access control. I'm just going to use that. Social messaging is another one, right? If we want to add chat to a Snapboard, there's a company I found, although I'm sure there could be others as well, but they have a very interesting web API, but they do all the metrics and gathering and analytics, and they give you reports on how people are using your chat. So you can get an idea how often they're using it, how frequently, you track the conversation. So if you want to add social, here it is, almost free. You know, some of these things you might have to pay for, but what's more expensive? Hiring a developer for 6 months to do it, which takes time, or farming it out to somebody who's already got it, and then, I know, you're wondering, what if they go out of business? What if they can't handle the scale? What if it costs too much? Of course, all these things matter. Start. For us, again, this is all a decision. My thought is, OK, let's go live with this thing. Let's see if people like chatting. Let's see if people are using it. If they're using it, they're staying on my site longer. If they're staying on my site longer, I can do ads and sell, you know, something. That's my product. Another product could be a whole other story. But the point is, you know, this is a personal example to sort of help you see how maybe you might think it through. And of course, it might get too expensive later if we get really busy. So guess what? Once we're live and we've done our core business and we're kind of up and operational and everything's smooth, we can hire someone to write our own social. OK. I'm not opposed to that. It might be necessary to save on costs if they can't keep their prices reasonable enough. It's all about, you know, strategy, getting the feature sooner versus not having it at all, for example. Now, forget about social and all these fun web apps that might not apply to business the same way. Let's think about just practical reasons people use the cloud for third-party integration. you have a website, you have to host a DMZ usually so that you can keep your services on the business layer behind the DMZ. But if they're, services that can be hosted with the service bus, that's an example I've seen customers use so they don't have to stand up a DMZ. So they can punch through the firewall, have the service available, and they get that protection from the cloud and the security of that. And therefore, we wouldn't need that middle tier there, the DMZ. That's one example. Another example, having some relational data on premise that's not allowed to leave premise. That implies it's allowed to fly over the wire, but just can't be hosted anywhere but on premise. Some companies, that's the requirement. And I've seen businesses that took some services and data that were behind the firewall and moved their media services out to the web, out to the cloud, in order to be successful, in order to be able to branch out and add features. But they had to keep the data behind the firewall, so they used the service bus to get those things exposed safely. So just one piece stayed on premise and accessed the local database. And then maybe there's other data that wasn't as mission critical that was allowed to go to SQL Azure. So you can mix and match a little bit here. Why would you do that? Because then you don't have to provision all the IT and the machines and the scaling out issues and all of that to manage what's on that side of the equation. So if you've already got all the machines and all the staff, then it wouldn't be an issue for you. Scaling out media access is another really popular reason, right? If you're doing anything with blob storage, media files, images, graphics, video, etc., content, training, whatnot, it's just really expensive to try to manage that yourself. So this is an excellent use of cloud on a real business perspective. So all these things I'm showing now are not even related to you being a startup per se. This is full-blown enterprises maybe just branching out or realizing we're growing too much, we need to move this somewhere else. And that doesn't mean you can't do the same sort of iteration process I talked about. It's just that your customer is now internal. Your customer for, is this a viable solution, could be the IT ops guys. They want to see, can you do it? I had a customer like that. They needed to prove to ops that this was viable and that it could be manageable. And the ops guy didn't want to learn Azure, so the devs took it over, figured it out, showed them, proved the concept, and sold it. So that's a customer. That's an iteration. That's a minimum viable implementation to prove a point, to make a decision about future plans. So same idea. So you've got blobs. Maybe you're using CDN to make sure that they're coming closer to your customers all over the globe. Easily made available. No overhead. Another thing is social login, which is becoming very popular, and it's not just for social apps or public internet apps, it's also for business. I mean, I'm running into lots of businesses using Salesforce.com and even Google for their identity provider in some cases, because they're standardizing on that as a corporate thing that they use, right? So they need to integrate with these people. I could write the code to do Google, Facebook, Yahoo, Windows Live, and stand up something that did that. But I don't want to spend time away from the business logic of my app to do that. So I'm going to use that because it makes sense to me. These are decisions you have to make, right? But it's, again, no effort, it's up, it's live, or in some cases it's, we don't have the expertise, we don't want to spend a bunch of money on that, look, this just works. All about whether you can leverage it or not. So we've talked about iterating and asking questions and finding your customer market. We've talked about taking that information and trying to build something that you can show a customer and gather feedback, gathering the metrics, figuring out if it's really working, listening, iterating, and now we're ready to go live. We've figured out partners that we might integrate with to leverage. We want it to be reliable, available, scalable now. So now we're moving away from, okay, it's a startup and we need to iterate, and we're moving on to Now I'm making a decision. Are we hosting this in Azure or any cloud or not? So if the answer is no, then you don't go here. But if the answer is yes, then we have a couple more things to consider, right? Because now I need it to be operational, available, scalable. I have to rig everything with diagnostics and performance counters right up front. Nothing more valuable than visibility into the app and what's happening, especially when you don't have the machine right here. And I don't actually believe much in the concept of using, the remote desktop and tinkering that way with Azure, personally, because I'm a big fan of the headless deployment, automating that with TFS, making it predictable, and not having to worry, because we're a small operation, and I don't have the time to worry about that, and I can't dedicate an IT person to that 24/7. It's not going to happen. Not yet. We start getting busy, then we'll talk, right? So rigging it with diagnostics, super important up front. Having external monitoring tools and alerts so that you know when something goes wrong, the ability to scale on demand, there are tools to automate that. And we'll just, quickly take a look at a couple of those things. So for example, here in Azure, my live site, actually, which is just a request invite page. There's nothing fancy going on just yet. But my live site has a bunch of metrics rigged up, right? Diagnostics is all ready to go. I can look in Storage Explorer. There's lots of tools for monitoring these things. It's showing me the percentage used. And I'm interested in certain counters. Like, I want to know that no requests were ever rejected because it was too busy, especially because, really, I'm using an extra small instance right now. Don't you all go hitting it at once, by the way. I don't know what's going to happen with that. But the point is, I want to know if that goes wrong, and I'm going to be able to see that in the metrics. So there's certain things you want to monitor, but what I'm pointing out really, too, is that Azure has obviously changed a lot. There's been a bit of a facelift here, so that now, until I have time to dedicate a team to all the other neat tools I could use for monitoring and measurement and diagnostics, this is kind of good enough to start with. It gives me that visibility and comfort I need for now. So when you're talking prototype, it's good. When you're talking maybe small business like us, it's good. When you're talking large enterprise, where the embarrassment would be a very bad thing, then you're going to take it a step further, right? And that would mean maybe some tools. There's a tool that I think is very interesting called Gecko Board. And it allows you to carry around with you either an iPhone or whatnot with a little dashboard, and you can hook it up to any measurements at all. But it's a really nice interface, really easy. And that kind of thing would be live-fed metrics. So you're going to get red alerts and things like that when things are not right. Just an idea. Again, there's other tools for it as well. The point is just to know, at this point we're live. I have to figure out how much I care about, or how much effort I have to put in to make sure that, things are going to be taken care of. What's the risk? And so we've now talked about I've gone live, and of course I'm going to have diagnostics and monitoring and so on. But probably the most important thing of all, which we should do very early, is pricing and revenue projections. You know why it's hard? It's hard because with the cloud, all these little pieces of the puzzle charge you in different ways. There isn't a fixed monthly cost. There isn't anything fixed. And in a way, it's frightening because you're wondering, well, how do I know it won't go from here to here? I've talked to people that have live sites dealing with media streaming and all kinds of very bandwidth-heavy operations. And my first question to them always, because I've gone through the process of trying to predict my own, scenarios, how did you know that the cost would be, controllable? And most of them say, we didn't. And the truth is, it might be hard to know, but what the next thing they say usually is, what we've learned is, based on the yearly or monthly charge we charge our customers, the costs are far lower than that. So we're looking for margins. Because if the margins are huge, or at least decent, then maybe it's not as frightening to take a little bit of a risk around the costs. But then again, I still want some predictability. Pricing requires some effort, understatement. So let's take a look at the effort, maybe, shall we? And before I do, this is my, iterative, minimum viable, not yet product. It is not a product, it's a spreadsheet. And it's completely horrendous because there's so much information in here. But you know what? I don't care because it works. So I'm going to show you the end first, and then I'll explain how we get to that. So if you look at storage and different costs in Azure, I take my scenario, you take your scenario. In this case, I tried to pretend about some things I'm not really using yet to see where the costs would go so I could show predictability. And so you take every piece, the VMs and what size you should have, how much storage transactions, how much bandwidth is being used for media, the cache if you're using it, the service bus if you're using it, access control, and of course SQL. So that's pretty much the gamut, at least, of what I have collected here. And then you look at projecting quarters, right? So that means somewhere in my spreadsheet I've got some numbers like, well, we have this many customers, and then this many, and this many, and this many. And when we have a customer, each of them does this or this or this. And I've got places I can go and change the numbers a little bit, and that will change what I see here. I have a negative, it looks like, so we got to work on that. The first 3 quarters don't look so good, and then they start to get better, like $8,000 a month. So I could pay like 2 salaries, maybe. But that's just the beginning, right? If I apply BizSpark, which are the programs Microsoft offer to small businesses, that maybe even some businesses that are attempting to push things to Azure to help you do that with less risk, then it starts to look a little bit more, impressive, because I'm not negative at all. So the costs are going to vary. Now, how do I get to these? Well, we've got compute cycles. So I've got a calculation here that tells me how much the monthly total is for the VMs based on if I need 2 small, 2 extra small, et cetera, et cetera. And this is all calculated based on numbers below. So when I get to that, I start filling in the different quarters and how much I had to pay a month. Now, as a business, $175 is pretty cheap. But with BizSpark, it's $0, so that's cheaper for the first year or so, right? And if I scroll down, you see I've got things like, how many producers? How many people are uploading content to sell in my system? This is sort of a fictitious extension of what I've got right now in my current service. And each quarter, I'm assuming it's going to go up, quarter 3, 4, 5, and so on. And I'm assuming the average number of consumers per producer is 500. So let's say I am an expert in WCF, and I upload a bunch of stuff, webcasts and things, and I have 500 followers who are going to look at those. I'm making some assumptions. You have to do that. So you have to kind of look at who are the people using the system. And sometimes there's 2 sides. There's the people producing content and the people consuming content. Sometimes. In other situations, maybe there's just the end user, and that's it. So you have to figure out what that looks like and customize your own spreadsheet, but it takes a little effort. You have to think about it. And then you have to think about, how do I change those numbers and affect the result? So with 10 people or users, my numbers over here are, let me just scroll back to the top here. So my numbers over here, I have a negative, but a small one, and it starts to look profitable at 8,000. And these are my costs, about 1,200 total. But let's change that. Let's go to the end month. Let's say 6 months from now, I expect to have 5,000. So now I've got 2,500,000 end users if you assume my numbers are correct, right? How many end users per producer of content? And we come back here and scroll down. Actually, I don't think that changes. Yes, it did. It didn't change much, but the reason it didn't change much is because the revenue is still offsetting. So it's kind of a measurement there. So let's leave it there. Let's say I've got 5,000 producers of content, 3% usually online. I figure out how many machines I need. Excuse me. And it looks like I need 2 extra large now. You see what I mean? So it's just incrementing it, giving me an idea based on memory usage and so on. Probably the most important of all of this, though, is storage. So storage, you're looking at everything from how many bytes per record each table, right? Just sort of getting an idea. How many bytes are stored in SQL per quarter, so that I can figure out how many gigabytes I need in my SQL, so I can figure out. And then if we talk about queues, email queues, this and that, I have to estimate how many are going to be used, what number of bytes are written to the queue. And then it's going to calculate based on the number of users, average, and activity, like how many times does a user log in, therefore how many times do I reset the password, therefore how many times am I writing to that queue. You get the idea. So there's a lot of work to do, but what you want to do is get it down to the point where, you know, you can just change a few numbers and affect the rest of the spreadsheet and get a result. So for example, if I say there's more than 2 downloads a day by user, instead there's 5, then I'm going to go back to my totals and actually, I'm not seeing much change there. Why? Don't tell me there's a bug. I don't think so. I think I'm just missing something. Let me go back down to something maybe more interesting, and that is the revenue offset. So in here, I've got things like how much media is transferred. That's where the real cost comes in. And how much is US versus APAC, because those have different prices. And then at the end of the day, what I'm trying to get to is how much are we going to make? And if we're charging based on download, and then we're also charging based on users and professional accounts, I have to estimate how many people have a professional account that are all the users in my system. Therefore, I'm charging $10 a month or whatever that is. I have to be able to flip the switch to say from $10 to $20. What does that do? When am I profitable? How many users do I need at what price to get me profitable? You have to have a spreadsheet like this, but tailored to your business, if that makes sense. This is, by the way, on my website, so that spreadsheet is available. And I update it frequently, and then I just repost it, actually, as I manipulate the change. But if I charge, $10 per piece of content instead, then I'm going to see different revenue. So it just starts to increment from there to where now it's like $10,000 a month in revenue. So my costs are pretty low, and here are my bottom line. So you get the idea. So I have the big font here so that you can see, but the point is you want to get it down to one little spreadsheet like this with predictable quarters, and away we go. And the hope is, what you're going to find is how much should I charge my customer, how many do I need of those customers to succeed, and how much are my costs, and which are the costs that are costing me the most. And what we found is when we looked at the idea of people uploading stuff, that's when it started really costing. Especially if you averaged people uploading 5 gigabyte per media, or maybe that's actually excessive, 50 meg. So assessing that is just super important. So that spreadsheet's on my website. You can play with the numbers, you can change things, but it's, I think, a helpful tool for starting so that you don't need a PhD to begin evaluating the costs of the Azure pieces. So we've talked about then end-to-end at this point. How to iterate, how to find your customers, how to listen, how to test, go live quickly, hopefully, because the cloud will let us do that and iterate without IT. But that's helpful for agility. And then eventually we're deciding, are we going live in the cloud? Therefore, diagnostics, performance counters. But this whole headless model, really, really helpful, because then I don't have to deal with IT. I like IT, though. Don't get me wrong. If anybody didn't put their hand up and they were lying. I should have drank the beer before I'd said that, maybe. So those are the messages for today. We iterate. We use platform as a service to save on the overhead of IT. And by the way, they don't lose their jobs, right? They just do other things better. We use other software vendors when we can so that we can show features sooner and then replace them later if you're not comfortable with that. Or at least to test if people like it. And ultimately, evaluate your costs and find out how much you need to charge to be successful. Because everybody wants to have revenue. Thank you.